to actually be speaking here to a group of students is extraordinary. Secondly, I'm very happy to be here because it is in support of the pro-life efforts that can't be popular on this campus, or even with your age group. So that's a very special thing. So I'm very honored by your presence here today. Very touched by it, so thank you very much. I think the most important thing I'll do is respond to your question, but I do have a presentation that kind of sets the theme and mood, and I hope you'll be patient with me. It's 26 pages long. It is, but it's double-spaced, so that's 5 plus 13 pages long. So it's big print, so maybe it's even like 11 pages long. So. And the title of my talk is Being Human in an Age of Unbelief. So that's us. We are trying to be human in this age of unbelief. So here goes. In getting ready for tonight, Charles Gray, who just spoke to you, asked me to keep two things in mind. First, he asked me to remember that we have a mixed audience here in Houston Hall, both Catholic and non-Catholic, although I think most of you are Catholics. Secondly, he asked me to explain what Catholics mean when we talk about the sanctity of human life, and why the Church deals with issues like abortion so vigorously in the public square. As it turns out, most of my sources tonight are not Catholic. That shouldn't be surprising. Catholics have no monopoly on respect for human dignity. Catholics do have a very long tradition of thinking about the nature of the human person and society. And I'll be glad to talk about that in my remarks. But I'd like to begin by setting the proper framework for our discussion, which needs to be broader than abortion. Last year, I had the good fortune to read Eric McTax's wonderful book, Bonhoeffer. It's a biography of the great Lutheran theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I've quoted Bonhoeffer's works many times over the years, and the reason is simple. I admire him. He could have been a professor. Instead, he chose to be a pastor. He could have had a sterling academic career of lecturing about his ideas and his faith. Instead, he chose to put them into action and to immerse himself in people's lives. He was not a man of values in the meager modern sense, but of virtues in the classical and religious sense, the virtues of justice, courage, and love, all grounded in the deep virtue of faith in a loving God. The Third Reich hanged Bonhoeffer for his resistance activities just a few weeks before the end of the Second World War. Today we see him, rightly, as one of the great moral witnesses of the last century, a man who fought for the good in the face of very great evil and at the cost of his life. Another great moral witness of the 20th century was the writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who began as an atheist but ended as a Russian Orthodox. His history of the Gulag Archipelago is an indictment of Marx, Lenin, Stalin, and the brutality of Soviet repression that grew naturally from their thought. It's a masterpiece of modern literature. Like Bonhoeffer, Solzhenitsyn wrote from direct experience of imprisonment and organized inhumanity. Unlike Bonhoeffer, he survived the war, survived years in prison camps, and was eventually exiled to the West. And that's where his story gets useful for my purposes tonight. In 1978, 4 years after Solzhenitsyn left Russia, Harvard University asked him to speak to its graduating students. What Harvard may have expected was praise for Western abundance, freedom, and diversity. What he got was very different. Solzhenitsyn began by noting that Harvard's motto is veritas. This is the Latin word for truth. Then he added this: truth is seldom pleasant. It is almost invariably bitter. Then he spent the next 6,000 words saying what nobody wanted to hear. He methodologically criticized Western cowardice and self-indulgence, the vanity and weakness of America's intellectual class, the, quote, tilt of freedom in the direction of evil, end of quote. The right of people, as he said, not to have their divine souls stuffed with gossip, nonsense, and vain talk by the mass media. He criticized a pervasive Western atmosphere of legalism and moral mediocrity, and the rise of a destructive individualism that now forces decent people, he said, to, quote, defend not so much human rights as human obligations. Some of Solzhenitsyn's hard words came from his suffering. Some flowed from his loneliness for his own country. But while he was harsh in his comments at Harvard, he was also accurate in at least some of what he said. Speaking of his Russian homeland, he said, quote, after suffering decades of violence and oppression, the human soul longs for things higher, warmer, purer than anything offered by the practical atheism now common in the West.